Good afternoon, everybody. You're all very welcome to this, the first of our first talks for 2021. My name is Paul Fahey. I'm the Artistic Director of Galway International Arts Festival, and I'm delighted to be joined here today by the wonderful artist John Gerrard, who is at this stage a long time associated, I think, with the festival. We've done a lot of projects together. And I'm sure a lot of you who are here will know of John's work and the extraordinary work that has just been taking place for the last number of weeks out in Derry Gimlabog in Connemara Mirror Pavilion, which I'm sure some of you saw the first iteration of during the festival in 2020 at the Claddagh when the great corn work was unveiled on the screen there. But John is one of, he hates being called that he's celebrated internationally, but he is one of our most celebrated international artists, and it's really wonderful to have an artist of his calibre making such an amazing impact worldwide, and it's great that we have had a long relationship and been able to work together. John's work has been seen in the most extraordinary of places. He loves the notion of public intersection with big pieces of artwork, and he's shown his work in everywhere from the Lincoln Plaza in New York in front of the Metropolitan Museum to the Coachella, I can never say Coachella correctly, Coachella Valley Desert in Palm Springs in California, to London, to forests in Norway, and home to Ireland, to extraordinary places like the 4,000-year-old Derry Gimlabog in Connemara, which we're thrilled to have as part of our commission for Galway European Capital of Culture 2020, who are our partners on this particular project. So John, you're very welcome back to Galway once again.
Thank you.
So I think before we start having our conversation, we might show us a few photographs and a short little video of what's been going on in Connemara over the last number of weeks, and you'll get an idea as to what the work looks like for those of you who haven't seen it, and we'll have a chat then about how it all came together. So these are just some still photographs to begin with. You might just do a little slower for people to be able to take them in. You can see the person in the foreground there, just to give an indication of the scale of this particular work. Again, these were shot at, I think that's a sunrise photograph. So the cube itself, it's a perfect cube. It's 7 meters by 7 meters by 7 meters. It's mirror on 3 sides and on the roof, and then on the facade where you see the leaf-covered figure. That's a custom-made LED screen, 7 meters by 7, on which the new work leaf figure appears, and that's a moving image, and you'll see a short video in a moment. Again, these are another series of great photographs by Ross Kavanagh, the photographer, and that's it from behind. They're really extraordinary. So this is you can see the image moving. It's just a short piece. So one of the great comments I've enjoyed hearing John over the last couple of days is how effortless everybody thinks it looks on the bog. It certainly wasn't effortless in getting it there, but it's great that that's one of the things that was achieved with the installation. We'll talk a little bit more about that. You can see a person walking along in the background. And then I think we've 3 more aerial shots. Yes, these are by Colm Hogan using a drone. Again, so you can see the extraordinary landscape within which it's set with the 12 pins there in the background. And again, an even wider shot. I think we've got one more. Yeah, really beautiful photographs. So John, it's kind of clear just from looking at the piece there. So there are 2 kinds of portraits going on. We have these reflective mirror walls So that very much reflects a portrait of the environment within which we're in. And incredible to see how much they change as daylight changes and weather condition changes. And then on the front of the LED screen we have, it's a virtual world. We'll talk about how that's created. So, and that's a virtual world, it's a virtual portrait of the place within which this figure, the leaf cover figure, performs this series of movements which are a lament for what's going on environmentally. So can we go back to the beginning? This kind of idea came about like many years ago when Galway was preparing the bid book for the European Capital of Culture. So going back to, I think, the very first conversation you and I had about what we could do for that was maybe in late 2014 or early 2015. So this is 6 or 7 years on the go. So do you want to talk a little bit about maybe how all that kind of came about and the idea behind the cube, etc.?
Yeah, so I suppose firstly, beginning with the leaf figure actually, the leaf figure had been a sort of a character, the leaf covered figure or the foliate figure is a sort of character that I've been interested in for about 2 decades. And about 2003 I actually produced a leaf-covered figure collaborating with my sister Esther in North Tipperary.
And this was one of the first images that John showed me, so can we do this? Yeah.
And so when you approached with this, really saying, be ambitious, we're going for this capital of culture and we want big visions. So I thought that this might be a moment to resurrect the leaf-covered figure as a living form. And not only that, but to kind of translate it into the digital, into simulation. But so jumping from that to the box itself, in this particular setting, which is very different from Cladachie. Cladachie had its own qualities and its own histories in a way. In this particular setting, the mirrored box has a couple of functions. I mean, first of all, and the one that I'm most interested in, is if you stand behind the mirrored box, you see the landscape. You see yourself in the landscape. And I was always interested that, that the public would sort of identify themselves, this is me in this place. And I suppose another layer is that they're in that place as either a kind of conscious or or accidental consumer of culture. They're sort of there to experience an artwork, or they are experiencing an artwork. And then on the other side, which is not mirrored, you have what really amounts to a kind of virtual mirror, because we chose Derry Gimlet Bog after a lot of conversations, a lot of site visits, Paul. We travelled around Connemara looking at different sites. We chose Derry Gimlet Bog, and then we worked with a number of different companies. One of them actually was a sponsor of the project called Blue Sky. Blue Sky provided us with at least 10 square kilometres, or even bigger actually, of surface data, kind of topological landscape data. So we got all of this, all the way to the mountains, we got all that as information.
And some of that was through satellite photography?
Yeah, satellite photography, and also landscape scanning. Yeah. And then we also worked with a drone scanning company to scan the scene, so we got all the elements as data. So really on the front, on the LED, you end up with a virtual portrait of that place, almost as if the LED is mirroring that place. And in the place of the public, you have this this very old character, this leaf-covered character, this foliate character, which we can get onto in a minute. That's the kind of, in a way, the kind of binary of the mirrored surface showing the public, virtual surface showing this form, this old new form.
And so that which I remembered as being like a green man figure, I'd kind of totally forgotten about it, but just from, it initially struck me as kind of being a quite a pagan-like figure, but it's a figure that actually appears you see it in a lot of European cathedrals and carvings of those faces. Can you tell us a little bit more specifically about that and where your interest in the leaf work? It's a she. Yeah.
So I would say that the origins or the sort of the importance of the green man figure is a little bit lost in time, but you do find them carved into medieval cathedrals often as kind of decorative elements. You come to the end of a bench and you have a foliate head, which is a leaf-covered head, and also stone carvings, leaf-covered figures. And they do crop up in much earlier settings, like there's a couple of sites in the Middle East where you have these foliate figures carved in stone.
And are they before the European ones?
They'd be earlier, yeah. But for me, I became interested in the leaf-covered figure as a hybrid between a plant and an animal. And prior to the widespread emergence of agriculture, a lot of the world was wooded. Historically, we lived in a wooded world, and sections were cleared for agriculture, and then that expanded. And I like to think of the leaf figure recalling a time where woods were a much more dominant language. And also the woods as a sustaining force. You had a lot of food which emerged from woods, be it, sort of acorns or such things. But it's, wood and animals that live there, all that kind of thing. But for me in this piece, I just was interested to revive the figure, as a figure that sort of perhaps predated the sort of total dominance of the human, let's say call it the human project, which obviously emerged over the last millennia, and really accelerated with the big oil strike from 1901 in Texas, when big oil emerged and really sort of allowed the human footprint to just go like
Which is
this.
something that featured in another work of yours, and we might talk about that in a little bit. But so now that we're talking about those things, perhaps we might just explain a little bit about the site and the historical importance of that. So Derry Gimla Bog, as I'm sure a lot of you will know, is the site where Alcock Brown famously crashed in that first transatlantic flight in 1919, so just over a century ago. And at the time there was a lot of like big monetary prizes on offer for whoever would be the first to successfully cross the Atlantic. And Alcock Brown had tried a number of times, and in 1919 were successful and crash landed here. So that's aviation and travel, etc., etc. And then on that site it's also the site of the Marconi site, which made huge advancements in telecommunication and sent the first telegrams, I presume, whatever, across the signals across the Atlantic to the States. So they're two big areas that have had a massive impact on. We've all benefited massively for them. We're sitting here with telephones in our hands, etc., etc. But they've also been two of the kind of the things that have damaged the world really in a way so much. And then here we have this very modernist-looking piece, but with, at its essence, I suppose, a figure that's lamenting the impact on that kind of non-human world. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so unusually, as you have pointed out, at the Marconi site, you have like the early history of global telecommunications, and that acceleration of communication also accelerated trade. Trade began to speed up alongside these signals that were traveling across the Atlantic, as opposed to traveling by boat, for instance. And also in the same site, you have the emergence of the transatlantic plane route, basically, which reduced the time of travel by from weeks to days, actually, originally. And the human participant derived benefits, as you said, from these accelerations and these sort of amplifications in a way. And I guess the leaf figure, the brief for the dancer who performed the leaf figure, who's Finola, the wonderful dancer Finola Cronin, was to, in a way, perform a lament for the non-human world that sort of, it's more acknowledged now, but over the last century, the kind of non-human world carrying the costs of this kind of acceleration and this expansion of human projects in a way. And I was particularly interested for Finola to produce a lament for those life forms that can't move, because we humans are relatively mobile, but many life forms just simply, have to deal with heat stress in place. They can't actually move around. So those interests were pre-existed this site from my point of view. And then in a funny way, they just all came together in the specific kind of project there on the basis of the commission.
And so you mentioned Finola Cronin there. For those of you who don't know, Finola Cronin was I suppose one of Ireland's great dancers who worked with, especially well known working with the Pina Bausch company in Germany. Pina Bausch is one of the great European choreographers. But can you talk about, but to make it clear, and I'm sure a lot of you know, but just the moving image, of course, is not video, as we said, it's all virtual. So can you tell us about, some of the practicalities, John, and behind the kind of the technologies that move Finola Cronin in the studio wearing a motion capture suit in Vienna to becoming a leaf-covered figure in a bog? How does all that happen?
So I work closely with a wonderful dancer and a wonderful teacher, actually, Esther Balf, who's also a movement analyst. You know, she works with dancers and with movement. And she and I worked closely with Finola in a lab in Vienna, in a studio in Vienna. And Finola wore a suit which has around about 16 sensors, which transmit wirelessly position and time. You know,
and this
position in
is kind
space
of like a leotard jumpsuit kind of thing.
It's like a leotard, yeah. And then as Finola moves, all of her motion is translated into information. And that information becomes like almost a database from which this figure draws up the annual performance in the work. So,
but is the initial figure so when that's kind of translated, what are you looking at on the screen? Is that like a little instinct person?
It's like a little stick person,
yeah.
Basically. And actually, in our case, we had an early version of the figure, of the leaf figure, so we were able to see how it would work when in real time as she was performing. So we were taking her motions, applying it to the virtual figure in real time, and checking how it was working. So programmer of the work is a guy called Hamlet Bressler, and he used a system called motion matching, which means that we algorithmically judge where Finola is in space at any time, and we choose the next sequence so that they can come together. They can kind of like connect in real time, which allows this kind of seamless, smooth performance over the day, which is one type of performance, and over the night, which is a very different performance. And in a way, there's a solar logic in this piece, because over the day, Finola gets more fatigued as the sun rises. So at the point the sun...
So it is actually following daylight? It's
yes.
Following, yeah, okay.
Yeah, so at the point the sun is at its highest, when the world is at its warmest, she's at her most fatigued, and then as the sun goes down, she kind of becomes a bit more energized. So, I mean, I personally am fascinated by how simulation and this idea of performance as data intersects with histories of theatre, actually, because in a way this is a kind of almost a kind of a new form of theatre where you can capture performance, integrate it into a virtual body, and then allow these performances, these in a way minimalist, kind of melancholy performances to unfold here. In our instance, it's like durational, from 9 a.m. each day in Derrygimla till 9 p.m. At Claddagh Quay, very beautifully actually, the corn work ran all day and all night for the 3 weeks. And actually one thing, in case we forget to say it, is that one hopes, as one expresses oneself creatively, that you don't make this problem of global heating worse. So in this setting, we've been able to power the work using biofuels and biogases, which are, you know, a carbon neutral energy source for the work.
And that's supported by Flowgas, we're the festival's energy partner, and it's been great to be able to do that and not to impact any more on the environment, which is great. But so going back to the technologies behind this. So it sounds painstakingly detailed, and I know it takes a long time to kind of make those. So do you want to just talk about like the duration it takes to create something like a complete kind of a character?
Well, we worked on this piece for a little bit over a year, I would say. And there's different teams of production. So there was one team that was focused on the landscape, producing the landscape, and that team was led by the producer Werner Putzelberger.
And so, and again, just for a little bit more detailed explanation. So like literally every grain of blade of grass, every detail in the sky, they're all digitally created by.
They're all virtual forms basically, and they all have to be designed and placed. Then the leaf covered figure was a very involved process, where we travelled to actually my sister's farm, Brookfield Farm in North Tipperary, and she has a very old oak tree, a beautiful old oak tree beside Loch Derg. And so we harvested the leaves from the oak tree in the spring, and I worked with a craftsperson, a maker, an artist called Gerrard Wisdom, and we developed a leaf suit. And then the modeler, who's called Max Logler, took each leaf, photographed it, modeled each leaf, and then we had to reassemble the physical leaf suit that we produced in Brookfield Farm as a virtual object, and then bring it into this world and actually develop a kind of a physics where the leaves respond to these real-time performances, basically. So when the virtual character takes a step, the leaves must react, and that was a kind of a system we had to devise. And then the leaf figure is finished as a virtual object. She's placed into the virtual scene, and then the performance is a real-time process being pulled up from this database, which is sitting in the cube. And then it goes into a kind of finishing process where I work very closely with the producer, because every part of this world has to become an image, one image. So if the grass is the wrong color, it begins to fall apart, basically. So it's quite an involved process. We use what's called a game engine to bring it to life.
So that's, again, just for a little bit more detailed explanation. So anybody who's into gaming, which half the world is, so it's a very similar technology.
It's the same.
The same thing. Okay.
I mean, in theory, you could have a controller and fly around this scene as the character is performing. But we lock in an orbital camera that moves around the figure. And that's a solar camera, so it moves at the speed of the Earth's turn. So you get one full turn a day and one full turn a night, basically. So it's almost like a figure of eight, one turn at night, one turn a day.
And so if we were to run, this is running until the 18th of September in Connemara, but if we were to run this like for 6 months, as the days shorten and we go into winter, the environment, the virtual environment changes with the landscape.
Yes, so shorter days in the winter, longer days in the summer. So it's an annual solar simulation brought to life using what's called a game engine.
Fantastic. And you mentioned Geraldine, who created the suit. She's the same person who was involved in making the corn figures.
Yeah.
I think we have a few images of that as well, if we want to maybe remind ourselves of that and talk a little bit about it. But going back to its placement in the world and how people interact with it. Like, I kind of forgotten how, and even this morning when we were out there, it was just great seeing all these families and people being so engaged with it, like so as well as being transfixed by the character. And it was interesting even watching people sitting down and almost like in a meditative kind of a state, just really engaging with the movements of the leaf figure. But then you had other people who were becoming part of the artwork and doing selfies of themselves by the mirror, or as the leaf figure was coming around. I mean, that's kind of a fantastic engagement by the public, where they become a really important part of how that's shared around the world through technology. So that's obviously something that has interested you hugely.
Yeah, I mean, I love museums, I love galleries, but there's huge sections of the population who don't enter those spaces. Maybe they don't feel comfortable entering these culture spaces, or maybe they don't have time. Maybe they're working or whatever it is. So I'm very motivated, historically here in Galway, to put corn work down in Cladachey, running 24 hours a day for the 3 weeks of the festival at that time due to COVID. It was supposed to be up for 3 months, but we had to shrink it down. I love the idea of, the young people who are down there hanging out, they'll experience the work here in this setting. Somebody going to work in the morning will experience the work. So it just opens up the possibility of a very broad public, and those who are very passionately interested in culture can also come and witness the work. Derry Gimla is obviously it's a more involved process to get there. You have to get to Derrygimla and then walk out 25 minutes. But actually, just on the subject of this we now complete the diptych. You know, the Galway 2020 Galway International Art Festival commission was for a pair of works, corn work and leaf work. And just to underline that corn work really is about agriculture, you know, because you have the River Corrib. Historically, the water wheels turned in the River Corrib and ground the grain that was grown locally.
So again, just the figures you're seeing, so this is corn work taken last year down in the middle pier in the Claddagh. And again, so the River Corrib, during one of our many walks down when we were deciding what we do, we stood and we looked at the power of that river, which, as John said, the energy from which was drawn to power all of these mills 100 years ago. And there were like flour mills and whiskey mills, the remnants of which are still, some of them are still there along the River Corrib. And, you know, we now have kind of our back turned, I suppose, on that incredibly powerful river that flows through Galway City, and we no longer harness what it could give us. But so that was kind of one of the starting points for this. So do you want to just continue a little bit more, John, about to explain?
I think we actually have a video of corn work running. If we maybe one second, next slide, forward. Yeah, this one.
We are, yeah.
So basically, the corn figures are.
We might just press the play on that, I think.
Yeah, press the tip. Yeah, the corn figures manifest a wheel through their performance. They walk quarter circle, turn through the spokes of the wheel, and then. So they actually kind of perform a sort of a water wheel or a solar wheel, you could call it. And really, they are a kind of coordinated, let's call it a social system. And they're very empowered, and they're very powerful characters. They're very, there's an aggression to them. You know, I asked the dancers to come at this performance, you know, as if they owned the place, you know. And in a way, if you look at, you know, the human sort of presence on Earth in the last century, you see just this enormously expanding agricultural footprint, you know, just growing bigger and bigger. And all other life forms just begin to move to the edges, you know, to the peripheries, to the parts that are less optimal for agriculture, such as Derrygimla, you know, in a way. But and so you have the corn work, which is about the success of agriculture and the aggression of agriculture in a way, and you know, particularly since the early 1900s, when agriculture became petrol-powered on many levels. You know, not only on the equipment used, the tractors and such things, but also nitrogen fertilizers. You know, petroleum chemicals in pesticides, fungicides, such things. You know, you see biodiversity dropping all the way through the 20th century until it reaches like 50% reduction, you know, by the end of the 20th century, and it's still going down. And then, so in a way, you have corn work as one pole of, let's say, a very kind of consistent set of human triumphs of feeding all these people. And then leaf work is the sort of, you know, plant-human hybrid who laments, in a way, for those who are not, those life forms that are not included in that sort of process. So,
can I ask you, do you think, like a few people over the last number of days when we were setting up and running all the technical tests and all that, as people were walking through the bog, and people really seem to kind of connect or empathise, actually, is what they did, with the leaf figure, which, as you say, is kind of a hybrid of human plant, whereas these figures look like they're more human in straw costume. Did that kind of surprise you that the immediate empathy kind of seems to be very much with the leaf figure?
Yeah, well, I mean, the straw figures, they are also folk figures. I mean, the straw boys they're still present around Galway. You know, they still crop up at weddings and such things. They are later agricultural figures. Again, like, their histories are disputed, you know, where do they emerge from? But I always feel that figures like the straw boys, there's many correlations for them in other cultures of farmers, particularly, subsuming themselves into what I describe as a food landscape. You know, if you have a cornfield or a barley field, it's a food landscape, and then the farmer subsumes herself or himself into a suit made from this straw. It's also, straw is a strong solar sign in a way, but and the minute you're masked, these are cloaked figures, and within that anonymity, all sorts of impish behavior can emerge, stealing the bride often from the wedding, or drinking whiskey, or whatever it is. And these are all behaviors and traditions which really speak of a time when, if you didn't take care of your landscape, if you didn't carefully farm, hunger was a real risk, famine was a real risk. And I always think about these kind of performances, these straw performances are, a little bit of a kind of almost sympathetic, magical conversation with sustaining landscapes. And the leaf figure, as I said before, is actually these are agricultural figures. And I don't think that the leaf figure is an agricultural figure. I think it's a much older figure. In a way, alongside the emergence of, let's call it kind of mega agriculture, you also have the emergence of Christianity, which is a monotheistic religion. And medieval churches are very interesting in the way that they lay a monotheistic belief system over a polytheistic landscape, And certainly in Ireland, you've got like little hints of that, like the presence of Sheila na gigs in Irish ecclesiastical settings is very curious, and interesting, because that the full impact and importance of the Sheila na gig has been lost in time, but they're there communicating to us now about different types of power, different types of almost kind of communication. And I think the leaf figure again talks about these kind of different power sources which were in a way displaced by agriculture, and then later on, you end up where we are now, where agriculture is displacing everything in a sense.
So you grew up on a farm?
I grew up in a farming community. I didn't grow up on a working farm, but in a farming world.
But is that where you're interested? Because all of your work, way prior to this, going way back 20 years ago, to your smoking trees and all that, have had concern for the environment absolutely at their heart, and you've been very consistent right the way through your entire career on that. So where is that all originating from?
So Paul is referring to a series called Smoke Trees, where they're a portrait of 5 trees around where I grew up in North Tipperary, and instead of producing leaves, they produce smoke. So they're like smoke trees. And, in a way, they imagined, a work in which, our world in which things are reversed, where instead of absorbing carbon dioxide, the trees start to kind of actually be net producers of carbon dioxide. And sadly, I just read recently that the Amazon is now a net producer of carbon dioxide as opposed to a net absorber of carbon dioxide. So in a way, these things have come to pass. I mean, I'm definitely, I would say, as much as I'm an artist interested in ecology, I'm an artist who's interested in energy, actually, and also in these wider subjects of power, who wins, who loses. And, the word power is an interesting one because it has those different layers and nuances, from, power as in energy, but also power as in really a kind of violence, and also power, cultural power, political power, agricultural power, whatever it may be. And I would say that a work like Western Flag, which was a kind of inherited the idea of smoke as a sculptural element within the virtual.
And this one refers back to the spindle top, which you mentioned
earlier
on.
Texas.
In 1901.
I mean, that's a work which is about oil, and it's about obviously energy.
I think we may have an image of that at the end, possibly.
But it's also a work about what I would describe as the American century, because 1901, first big oil strike in world history in Spindletop, Texas. And within the next 50 years, you had America emerging as a energy superpower. By 1950, America was really an energy superpower, and its technologies transformed transport, transformed warfare, transformed agriculture, and that dominance of America has been greatly reduced between 1950 and now. But it was a very profound global change, just what petrol achieved and, how that was achieved. So Western flag, as much as it speaks about ecology, it also speaks about nationality,
So just to describe it, I don't know if we have an image or not. So it's a virtual flag in a desert on a pole, but the flag itself is this continuous stream of smoke that takes on, in a way, like the global flag, I guess.
Well,
and that's probably your best known work, I guess.
Originally commissioned by Channel 4 as a TV
Here we are.
hack.
This is in Somerset House in London.
So that's one of the first major LED wall installs in this case in London, in Somerset House. And here you see a flag which is produced from smoke as opposed to from fabric. And I suppose the underlying thread of Western flag is that climate change really has the potential to disintegrate the nation state, as we currently know it. And certainly the kind of stresses that climate change is placing upon human populations, this kind of migration crisis that we are currently experiencing. A lot of it has to do with people no longer being sustained in place and having to move looking for food, in a sense, and water.
Which we have a big history of doing ourselves, and we should always be more welcoming. While we're looking at this, John, and then this, this is widely available. Anybody just Google Western flag, and you'll see it, see it moving. It's really stunning and really powerful. But this piece you recently, you created your first Nifty, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of the Nifties. I still can't fully get my head around them, but Nifties is the non-fungible token. And essentially what a Nifty is a digital piece of artwork, and what somebody, if they buy it, or they're buying correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is like a unique piece of code that brings them to this digital piece. And they have had, it's interesting talking about power and energy and all that. They're fascinating in the way that they're empowering in one sense to maybe kind of cutting out that middle person in terms of of commissions for galleries and all that, and perhaps empowers the artist in terms of their own career, and not just in visual arts but in music and in other forms. But they've experienced a lot of criticism in terms of the amount of energy it takes to actually sustain them. And I know that energy that technologies are constantly changing and hopefully will improve soon. But do you want to talk a little bit about that and your entry into that world?
So I think, first of all, I think it's very important to speak about art worlds, plural, because often I hear people talking about the art world, and I'm part of an art world, a contemporary art world, and the emergence of the NFT, the non-fungible token, has produced a visual culture that it's made visible a visual culture which has really blindsided my contemporary art world, the one in which I work in. And I would say something, for instance, people often judge the world using very economic yardstick. So if you look at something like...
And this, of course, we should say, trades always in cryptocurrencies.
Yeah.
As opposed to traditional.
No, so Larva Labs is an entity. 2017, they produced 10,000 NFTs called CryptoPunks. And each one is an algorithmically generated little punk with different attributes, aliens, different things. And I follow Larva Labs on Twitter. So every time there's a Larva Lab sale, they let me know. And, last week, one sold for $7 million, one sold for $5 million. These are huge values for, as you say, a JPEG. I think of it as a kind of a deed, which is a smart contract on the blockchain. And it is digital art, and it is visual culture, but it's certainly not emerging from the kind of structure that I traveled through, which is art school, gallery, biennale, museum. It's just, it's coming from somewhere else. And the big auction houses have jumped in very quickly, Christie's and Sotheby's, and they're doing NFT sales.
And it's been fascinating. Again, I don't know how many of you have been following it up. Like, I mean, the last, say, maybe not even 12 months, it seems to really have just exploded.
Yeah.
Of course, there was that great sale for $65 million or whatever it was.
I wouldn't call it a great sale.
Well,
it was
okay, I mean great in a different way.
It was a low point for visual culture, the Beeple sale. But anyway, putting that aside. But just to try and answer your question. So, very, very interesting and a very sudden shift in visual culture. Artists such as I said, artist collectives, Larva Lab, or lots of different, Fuck Render, all these different kinds of artists emerging suddenly and achieving big values in the public domain, producing non-fungible tokens. There is a lot of criticism of, the Ethereum network, which is the network on which most NFTs are sold, currently has a major ecological problem. And I think if you are interested in ecology, it's not really possible to work on the Ethereum blockchain right now because it needs to be reformed, and that's planned actually. But there are other chains made up of the coins, such as Tezos, and a lot of artists are now working on Tezos. But in the heat of March 20th, which was almost a kind of slightly frenzied time in the NFT arc of presence in the world, I produced one singular NFT from the AP of Western Flag that I own. It's a little 30-second looping MP4. And I released it in support of an entity that I've invented, which is called Regenerate.farm, which is a fund to support entities that are trying to change agriculture, initially in Ireland. So I did it on that basis, and I will return to the NFT space to a sustainably powered blockchain at a certain point.
So you've sort of pressed pause on that for...
Yeah, I did one project with Low Energy Network a couple of weeks ago, and I'm just kind of a little bit witnessing what's happening at the moment. I think it's in ecological terms, it's fascinating because the art market, as it's known, typically takes things, analog things, let's say a painting, flies it to Basel, puts it in a cubicle, sells it to somebody, and it's then shipped somewhere else. And abruptly, this NFT space, these are not things. These are deeds pointing to digital files. So people are consuming and trading in visual culture, but there is no thing. There's no analog object. So it moves much quicker. People trade in these things much quicker. There's no geography. It's kind of post-geographic. And in a way, I would say that what's happening in the NFT world is, it points to the beginning of a kind of a globalized sort of non-geographic art world. And that's interesting. And I think one should pay attention to it.
And it certainly in the media, it seems to have the foot is off the accelerator a little bit in terms of the reporting on it and all that. So, do you expect it to continue at such a pace, and it's here to stay? Yeah.
Oh yeah. Just in the last, I think probably about $1 billion of NFTs have changed hands in the last month, something like that. So, and the culture is becoming quite. One of the big places that it's very significant is in gaming. So it's not just about visual art.
Yeah, of course.
If you're in a game and you desire like a skin for your digital, if you want the leaf-covered figure in your game, you can buy it as an NFT, and that is a type of a deed for that skin. When you're tired of it, you can sell it. So it just allows value to be assigned to digital assets in a completely new way. And that is on the basis of the idea of the blockchain as in a sense, a post-national legal structure. I'm kind of a little bit going out on a limb here, but if I buy a house in Ireland, it has a deed, and that deed intersects with, let's just say, a local legal structure. If I buy an NFT, the legal structure is based on the idea that the blockchain is forever, which is a sort of fascinating idea. And whatever is minted to the blockchain is available to everybody forever. So
it sounds like a big moment.
Well, if you look at, in the Irish context, it's interesting, but nation states have, I would say, nearly entirely in the last 20 years lost control of corporate taxation. The legal structure in the nation state has simply failed to capture corporate profits. That's now been addressed 20 years later, but a lot of money has, passed through, let's just say, a little nation I'm not going to mention. But national legal structures struggle with the digital age. And I'm putting it out there that the blockchain feels to me like a emergent legal structure which has its risks, because if I have a cryptocurrency, there's no bank. I'm managing my asset directly. It's security, all of that kind of thing. But there's just something about the way the digital has leapfrogged the national and is its own thing. And cryptocurrencies are, in a way, the currency of a digital realm that's post-national. And there's a sort of an emergent legal structure coming up, which NFTs, I think, are pointing to. And that's one of the reasons, I think, why they're moving so fast.
Yeah, it's endlessly fascinating. We could talk about it forever. But I want to go back to talking about these kind of images and these works. And the Western flag, which I think is so powerful. You're making a new work now that's in a way it's related to that, which is called Flair, which I know hopefully will debut in the next year or so. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that and how it relates?
So I, working with a wonderful individual, Francesca Thyssen-Bornemisza, her father gifted his collection to the nation of Spain. So the Thyssen-Bornemisza Museum in Madrid holds that family collection, and Francesca actually owns Western Flag. Her entity is called Thyssen-Bornemisza Art of the 21st Century, and
you showed that in Madrid.
Yes, so she bought it. She bought my work, and she put it up in Madrid for the last climate change conference in Madrid last year. And when I was there, an amazing guy from Tonga called Uli Lucy stood in front of not this installation, but a very similar installation in Madrid during the climate change conference. And he said, John, I have to tell you, I'm from Tonga. And he said, the ocean is on fire. He said, I am frontline witnessing, the burning ocean. And by that he meant temperatures rising, sea is rising. And Tonga is one of the first line nation states at risk of being erased by climate change, because the sea will just simply, swamp the entire island nation, basically. And he, he basically asked for help, actually, but not to me, but to this entire conference in Madrid. He said, the ocean is on fire and we need help. And I was very touched by that, very moved by that. And I went away and I thought about it for 3 or 4 months. And I've been interested for many years in flaring, that you have an oil platform at sea and waste gas is flared. And again, I often, a lot of my works pivot on a type of, on the kind of ambiguities embedded within language, because a flare is is a gas flare, but it's also a distress signal. You know, so you have a flare. If you're lost at sea, you can flare. You can send up a flare. So I began to think about this idea of a flare, an alarm flare for the burning ocean, and I asked if Uli would go out into his sea and document it, which he did. He went out into Tonga and he made this beautiful record of the sea in Tonga.
Through photography?
Through photography and video. And then I looked very closely at flaring. And so we have now made a flag of flames, which is positioned in the ocean at Tonga. And I've given it to Uli. It's his work. It's an edition, and so the first of the edition is his. And the ambition, which still needs to be confirmed, is that we will show it for Uli, with Uli, in Glasgow.
At the next
climate change conference.
Yeah.
And my dream or my ambition would be that to support Uli, who's both an artist himself but also an activist, that he could stand in front of something like this and speak both through words but also through image about this idea of the burning ocean, and to be given support in his drive to move political actors to do more about climate change, because for him it's viscerally real. You know, the ocean is too hot in Tonga right now.
It's life or death, isn't it? Yeah.
Certainly for that nation. Yeah.
And we can all do something. We were having a chat yesterday. I was saying it would be great for people just to, to leave something like this, or to leave Derry Gimland, to try and just do one little thing, one little action.
It's funny you say that, because actually my second ambition in Glasgow is not actually about individual action. It is about legislative action. Yeah. Because we can all do what we can, but the forces that are controlling the behavior of the world's armies, that are huge producers of carbon dioxide, the performance, the behaviors of the big power companies, big coal, big oil, that's legislative. To a degree, consumer behavior does affect that, but it's much more powerful for, Joe Biden to say, all fossil fuel subsidies gone, taxation on this now, these kinds of things. Because unfortunately, in this very powerful country called America, political ping pong means, you've got Trump, opens the gates, Biden's closed them, and it would be more difficult to open the gates again if there was legislative change, in these very powerful countries. And so if we do get Flair to Glasgow, which is a challenge, we may do it with the support of Galway Festival, and I think it would be very beautiful for Flair, which is in the ocean, to sit here in Galway next year. So we'll see if we can do that.
Hopefully we'll be able to implement that.
But if we do get it to Glasgow, I would love for Uli, to be given the opportunity to challenge, John Kerry to enact a legislative change.
I'm kind of conscious of time. We might just go back to our gorgeous leaf figure in the bog there on the screen, if we can, just in wrapping up. It's been a fantastic project, and it's been years in the making. It's been
a few more slides back.
Yeah. It's been an incredible challenge, but one that we've kind of all enjoyed overcoming. And we just want to thank our great production team for putting something of that scale out into a bog and making it run with as little impact as we can has been a big thing. We're very grateful to our production team led by Adam Fitzsimons, and to all of our supporters of the project, Galway 2020 especially, who supported the project from the get-go, and Flowgas, our energy partner, and Blue Sky Ireland, and to all of our great team. There we are in all its beauty. So it's, for those of you who haven't seen it, it's there for 3 weeks, running until the 18th of September. It's about 5 or 6 miles from Clifton. It's very clearly signposted, and it's about a 25-minute walk, relatively easy access by foot. If you're off, have any difficulty in movement, just give us a call and we'll arrange to get you there. So John, thank you very much. It's been an incredible few years, and I can't. I mean, look at it. It's just fantastic. We let it speak for itself. So, John, thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.